right, so tell the world who you are and what you do.
My name is Justin Mckee. I'm with Centerbull Kennels, breed American Bulldogs specifically and exclusively. I've been in the breed. I got my first American Bulldog in '96. I have not been breeding for all those years. I didn't really get life settled in and an opportunity to breed. I think I'm just completing maybe my first decade of breedings. But over the years, I've had quite a few dogs before then as pets. And then kind of got into the showing world, which kind of got the grips into me. And that's kind of when I took off with the dogs. So we'll get kind of, I guess, a little bit of history going back. Parents didn't have a dog. We traveled a lot. My parents were avid skiers, so I kind of grew up on a mountain. And when it wasn't ski season, it seemed like it was soccer season. And my dad was kind of a neat freak, so a dog wasn't in the lifestyle. My grandparents, who lived a couple blocks away, they had a couple dogs growing up. They had a little poodle named Tanya, and I think they had a collie that we ended up naming Duke. And that was really my only way to have a dog at the time. And I always kind of had some deep down love for no apparent reason of boxers. That was kind of where my heart was, and that's kind of what the direction I always wanted to go was with boxers. So I ended up leaving for school, playing sports. About my second year in school, second half of my sophomore year in college, I was planning on going to live with a buddy of mine out in Massachusetts for the summer. We were going to go. We had a place kind of loosely lined up in Northampton, Mass, and we had about 2 more weeks worth of school, and we decided that we were going to get a dog and just kind of share the rights on this dog. And he was a mix. He was a Shepherd Rot mix, and we ended up naming him Nugget. And last minute, right before we were supposed to move, the guy with the house called. He probably got wise to us and decided it probably wasn't the wisest thing to rent a house to 2 young guys. And he bailed on us, and Jamie and I kind of got left splitting up. He ended up taking the dog and back to Massachusetts with his parents. And so my first dog was really a short-lived one. And as a pup, I think he ended up later that summer, he ended up getting loose and get hit by a car and died. So that pretty much ended all that. I ended up staying in Central Ohio is where I am now. And ended up meeting a girl. We decided to start dating, moved in together, and she knew I had this love for boxers. So she kind of, back then it was all paper and classifieds. And she found some woman that had some pups for sale and kind of drugged me along for a surprise. And the lady had maybe a 16-week-old female, and I think it had already had parvo, and she had nursed it back. And it wasn't very expensive dog. And, my girlfriend basically bought it for me, and we took it home. And that was my first run with a working breed. She really only progressed to be maybe a 35, 40-pound dog. I'm pretty sure the parvo had stunted her. And highly dog aggressive, just an absolute terror of an animal as far as with other dogs. Real sweetheart, typical boxer with people, but man, when it came to other dogs, she was something else. And then somewhere along the line, and I'll be honest with you, I really don't remember my first encounter with an American Bulldog, but I just know that when I saw one, I had to have it. I was a young buck, and I was, as tough as I thought anybody could be. And I decided, man, I need to have one of those in my house and be that guy that had the badass dog. At the time, we had a townhouse. It was a 2-story with a basement. So we had the room for it. And fortunately, the place that we were living had a kind of an abandoned soccer field that was closed in by woods, and it only had one in and one out, which was just a driveway. So it was a great place to go down and cut the dogs loose and let them have exercise. And then, it was basically a fenced-in yard without having a fenced-in yard. And so, I kind of saw that I liked the American Bulldogs, and I really kind of pursued that back to the paper, looking through the classifieds, found a woman out on the east side of Columbus that had a litter. So we decided, fuck it, let's go do it. And we drove over, and I remember pulling up in this woman's house. It was just a modest ranch. and they had a fenced-in backyard. It was a chain link, but they had a gate that was drivable. You could drive through it, like the driveway extended through it. And it was dark out. It was kind of a fall or winter evening. And I remember pulling up, and then the two dogs that met us at that gate were just terrifying. The male was just a big white male. The female was probably a 70-pound full Johnson brindled bitch. And they were both to be 100% Johnson. Mm-hmm. And the male probably weighed about, probably just at 100 pounds or maybe just a touch less. He was a little overweight, so it was hard to tell. But so long story short, went inside and saw the pups. I fell in love, picked out a pup, bailed out. I think maybe spent $600 on the dog, got him home. And that was about 96, maybe as early as the beginning of 97. And that was really kind of hit my ground running with working breeds. And, from then on, it was just a pile of mistakes and the huge learning curve that comes with really kind of dialing in this breed to be where you want it. Mm-hmm. So they're safe for the general public. They're safe around your friends and stuff. And I've never really had too much issues with temperaments over the years, but, so we got that dog. Now we got the boxer. Her name was Blue. We got this American Bulldog. His name was Bred. And we stayed in touch with the breeder. And back then, I think we were maybe at pagers back then. And we would call the breeder every now and again and give her updates. And we kind of stayed friendly. Well, one day, I think Bred got to about 6 months old. And one day the breeder called back and caught my girlfriend on the phone. She was like, hey, just out of curiosity, I had this pup get returned back to me. And, he's 6 months old. He had parvo, but I've nursed him back to health. And, would you guys have any interest in taking him? You guys are really good with your dog. You stay in touch with me and all that stuff. And, little did we know, we were in our heads, we're like, hey, we're young kids. And it was like, hey, if two's cool, three's better. So we loaded up the van, headed back over to her house, and ended up picking up this dog. He was blind in one eye. Whoever took him, he had the eye scratch, and he was 100% blind in that eye. And this dog looked a lot more standard type. Had a real nice kind of decent conformation for what he was, but his body was kind of blocky, but his head was definitely more standard. And I think there's a picture somewhere along the lines that I've sent you of me as a young buck with two dogs at the end of the leash, and that's Brit, and the second one we ended up naming Fresh, which ended up being my girlfriend's dog. And so now we got the two male American Bulldogs intact. We got this female boxer, and at the time we're taking them everywhere. And back then, most people didn't really know what American Bulldog was. So if you took them to a jazz fest or a carnival or whatever was in town, and you were trying to get the dogs out, man, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. Everybody would stop and talk and ask you, like, what kind of dog is that, man? Where'd you get this from? And it was just kind of a different era. And I don't know if it was just geographical for me. But the dogs really weren't that well known. Mm-hmm. And then kind of fast forward, one night I'm on the couch sleeping, wake up, them two males are in full on war. They're just fighting their brains out. And I get up, and this is all brand new to me. I'm like, okay, shit, what's going on? Break the dogs up, get them separated, put them in crates. And, Fresh, he was kind of a nerve bag. I think it was just genetics. Looking back at it, I mean, he was so bad with people. Realistically, he was so nervy that when my buddies would come over, we used to shoot a lot of pool, and we would come home. The dog liked one of my buddies, but everybody else he'd give two shits about. My buddy ended up renaming him Friendly, because he was just anything but friendly, which was kind of ironic. But those two started getting into it, and man, Fresh, he just couldn't let it go. He was a dog that his feelings were hurt that he got his ass kicked, and he would hunt the other dog down. If he was in a cage in a bedroom behind a wall, he didn't care. He wanted to get to him. So it really got kind of cumbersome to have all three in the house. And I kind of got to the point where I told the girlfriend, I said, hey, look, you kind of took ownership of this dog. I said, if we're not really willing to get rid of the dog, you're gonna have to get your own place. And sure shit, she did. And so she took off with that dog, and I stuck around. I still had Brit and Blue. And that was kind of my first introduction, between the boxer and the bulldog with the dog aggression. And I can go into my thoughts on that later, which took a long time for me to work through and learn and understand just where that comes from. But, that was where I kind of got started with them. And then me and the girl, obviously, she moved out, so we kind of waned, and she kind of went her own way. I think she ended up down the line. She ended up rehoming the dog, and he just got even more nervy and ended up having to get put down. I don't know if he had a bite or what the situation was, but me and her really didn't stay too much in touch after that. We reconnected as adults, but she's since passed. So, ended up, kind of dating and met what was going to be my wife. We were dating, decided to get our own place. I was ready to move out of the spot that I was in, and we got a house. Unfortunately, I was pretty active with my dogs, and we took them everywhere. And one day we were out hiking, and we got ourselves into some unfamiliar territory, and the dogs were off leash, and ended up losing my dog, the bulldog, that day to an accident, which was pretty tough because that dog was kind of the pinnacle to all my buddies, and everybody kind of knew me for the dog. And so we kind of it was a rough day that day. Put him to bed and kind of set our peace with him. And moving forward, my girlfriend at the time, we ended up renting a house, and I was pretty upset. It took some time to get over it, but I was damn sure and ready I was going to get another bulldog. And so this time I had just started in the trades, and I was doing a little bit of travel, mostly within Ohio. And I started, every time I'd go somewhere, I'd grab a paper and start looking through the classifieds again. And I found a fella up in Cleveland. His last name was Shepard. I don't recall his first name, but he had a Freddy Krueger grandson. And, I wasn't a pet head back then. I really didn't know a ton. I wasn't in the bulldog scene, which was, back then we're probably starting to push 99 now when this is going down. And the bulldog scene was just ramping up. The American Bulldog Review was out. I didn't know any of that stuff back then. And so I found this guy, and he had this Freddy Krueger grandson, and I went up and met him when I was up there doing a job. And we started talking. He had this all-white male that he was really working protection. He was really trying to get the dog into a spot with a local police department, but there was a stigma about having bulldogs in lieu of shepherds, or I don't even think Malinois are really in that line of work yet, but there was a real stigma of having bulldogs, in the back of a cop car, because it mostly misrepresented as a pit bull. But the dog, you could tell he had this dog on point, and he really had the intelligence to get it done. I think he was doing some scent work with him. So long story short, I looked through the litter, didn't really know what I was looking at. I think one came up to me, and he looked cool enough. So I said, yeah, let's do it. And he let me cut loose with the pup. And I think the pup was only like 5.5, maybe 6 weeks. And I remember coming back, I was riding shotgun with the guy that I was working with, and the damn dog slept on my shoulder, kind of like a parakeet. And he was just a little thing. And got him home, and kind of started get some feet under him. I still had the boxer, so she was kind of showing him the ropes. And at some point in the first 6 months of that dog's life, my girlfriend at the time got pregnant. And so now we were expecting our first kid. And I made the decision, because I was traveling at that time, that I really wanted to put some manners on this dog and get him dialed in. If I wasn't going to be home, I wanted my wife at the time. She wasn't but 5 foot and 95 pounds, so she wasn't going to be able to manhandle a big dog as he matured. So we hired this trainer to come out, and he basically came out once a week and ran me through paces and left me with homework. And I started working this dog, and, in accountability to genetics, the damn dog, you show him something once and he picked it up instantly. He was like a damn robot by the time I got him done, to the point where we could have him, he was sending articles. You could show him a pen and then take him to another room and go hide the pen in the house. He'd go and damn find it. I mean, it was just stuff that I didn't even need him to do. He would just pick up on instantly. Now, I will say that he had a real affliction towards men. He did not like men. He hated my father, anybody. He would tolerate my friends, but it was more like I'd put him in a place command, and he would just sit there and kind of grumble under his breath. He'd never really act out on it, but he wasn't too keen on it, which to me at the time, I was like, well, it's kind of a good position for me because I was traveling and for work, and my wife was there with the kid and now this dog, and he would do his thing, and I knew he would bite if it really push came to shove, because he was a dog you couldn't lean on too hard. Otherwise, he'd check you back on your correction. And, that dog kind of grew up alongside my son. We were still living in Central Ohio, and we decided we were going to try to build a house. So we wanted to save up. And fortunately, we were in the position I was traveling so much that it was just my wife, my son, and this dog. The boxer along the way, we decided to start rehoming because she was just getting a little too chippy with the Bulldog, and I wasn't having it anymore. And honestly, I think we had a young couple that was going to take the dog, and the day that they came over to pick her up, she ended up scrapping the Bulldog in front of them, and they were like, oh yeah, we can't do this. And the unfortunate truth is I ended up putting the dog down. Now in hindsight, with 30 years experience, I could have mitigated it in a different way, most likely, but at the time I wasn't prepared, and I couldn't leave this situation when I'm not home, so I didn't feel comfortable with it. I wasn't going to pass the buck to somebody else that had the same problem. So right. We ended up putting the boxer down, and so it was just the three of them. We had the opportunity to go live with my in-laws up in Cleveland to save some money to build this house, and so we took everything, put it in storage, and basically it was just my wife, son, and dog at the in-laws house, and I was on the road working. I'd come home for a week or so at a time, and the dog was perfect. They didn't have a fence. The dog's off-leash trained. I mean, he was an absolute gem of an animal. And it really sparked my interest into what could be, what could be with these dogs if I really had the time and energy to put into it. And, yep. And then, life kept moving. We did build that house. We ended up moving down there. Somewhere along the line, I decided I want another dog, and now my son's getting a little older, and the family was like, oh, we should rescue a dog. And I was like, I wasn't all that keen on that, but we ended up rescuing some woman up by us where I live now. She had this mountain cur that she was looking to rehome. It was a female. I knew she'd do well with the other dog, and we went up there and got this damn mountain cur, and honestly, it's probably the worst dog in my entire life. And I've had a lot of dogs, and she ended up being my son's dog, and she was just wiry and oily and smelly and just nothing. There was just nothing pleasant about the dog. It wasn't very personable either. Just kind of was a true couch potato. She'd go out, and she didn't do anything wrong, but she didn't do anything right either. So, we had her and the Bulldog in the new place, and I was still traveling quite a bit. And then the reality came. We ended up we decided to have a second kid. After the second kid, the wife was kind of tired. I was traveling. I was building movie theaters for a living and doing all the flooring and lighting and stuff. And I was traveling probably 300 days out of the year. So life was getting a little busy for her. Fortunately, we were in a position where she didn't have to work, so she was at home with the kids. But even still, now I had a 5-year-old and a newborn, and she was pretty much at her wit's end about being by herself. So I ended up coming and taking an office position with the company that I was getting work from, and that's kind of where I hit the ground running. I started picking up more dogs, and still at the pet stage, because we were living out in the country, but it was still a development. It was a very new development, so it was still kind of spaced out. But it was still not a breeding. None of that stuff was on my mind. I was coaching at the time. Now that I was home, and I was doing some other stuff to keep myself interested in growing. But nothing with breeding. I just kind of was on the outside looking in. taking in the dogs and trying to keep up with the internet was just starting to pick up again. So we were just trying to keep up with what was going on in the dogs. And at some point I picked up another dog along the way, Bach, who was the Freddy Krueger grandson. He was getting up there now. He's 10 or 11 years old. And I decided I was going to get another male to kind of replace him and let him kind of train him up. And again, back to, I think this time it was an online ad. Found some woman up in Canton, Ohio. She had a 100% Johnson dog, which for some reason I just had this, mindset that I had to stay within that Johnson bloodline to have a real American Bulldog. And there was no like real substantiated thing that made me feel that way, but that was just where my head was at the time. And so I cruised up there. I remember it was a shitty night. It was snowing its ass off. I had a little minivan I was doing side work out of, rolled up there, and she wasn't asking much for the dog. I think she only had the one pup left. He was a red brindle pup with a red nose and all white head. And he had the white feet and the white tip and the blades on his chest. And, ended up coming home with him. He was a dream in the car, never peeped, never made a move, got him home. He was an absolute fucking terror. And he hit the ground running in a place he had never been, and he would have tore down every curtain if it was possible. Mm-hmm. And that mentality and his temperament kind of chased right along through his entire life. Bach finally got to about 13. Copper was grown up. We put Bach down because he was just struggling too bad, which was that was a tough road with him. But honestly, probably one of the best dogs I've ever owned. And then, so now I got this new dog, Copper. He's a year or two old. Of course, one is good, two is better. And found a guy locally online, had a pup. I think just had one pup left. And we're still friends to this day. His name's Zach. His kennel name's Farmyard Bulldogs. He breeds a little bit more on the extreme bully side. And he lives about 15 or 20 minutes away from me. So I went over to his house and we kind of chewed the shit for a little bit. And he ended up picking up this pup. We named him Ziggy. He was kind of a different little pup. He was real laid back. And I guess along the way before Ziggy, I think I had entertained like quasi adopting from a breeder a dog that had washed out. And I went out to Dayton and talked to a woman named Julie who ended up being good friends. Her last name's Bingham, and she has Bingham's American Bulldogs. She had a dog named Tank that had something going on with his hip. He had some atrophy in his back leg, and I really didn't care at the time. I just kind of wanted to always have a Bulldog. I didn't really care about too much of anything. I didn't really know what to care about, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. And we kind of determined in the conversation when we met that the dogs probably weren't going to get along. Copper was so rambunctious, and this dog probably wasn't going to take it. If they got turned on, they're probably just going to fight. And I wasn't looking to go back down that road again. So we got Ziggy. So we had Ziggy, we had Copper, and then we still had that mountain cur. That mountain cur was going to be the end of me. She was going to live to like 25 years old. I thought I'd never get rid of her. But then at some point we kind of weathered that recession of 08, 09. And I think we got to about 2012 or 13, and my wife and I decided it was time to boogie out of the neighborhood. The neighborhood that we built our house in, for the first 5 or 6 years, maybe. I take that back. For about the first 2 or 3 years, basically my wife was there and I was traveling. And then when I came off the road and working in the office, in the meantime, the neighborhood had kind of built up around us, and we had a corner lot, which it was kind of like an oval that we lived on, and you had to pass our house. Everybody that lived on the oval had to pass our house. So it just got to be a point where I was just like, man, I'm done with the neighbors, and it would be nice to, we're out in the country. Let's find a place to be out in the country. it was one of those things where invited the realtor over on a Saturday, talked about selling the house. He was kind of him-hawing. He's like, what do you want to do? I said, throw a sign out there. Let's see what happens. Sold the house the next day on Sunday, full offer. And we were kind of scrambling to find a place to live. In the meantime, I had started going to some dog shows because it started to pique my interest, and I had learned about them. And Julie, the lady with Tank, was hosting some shows out in Dayton. And I would just go out there with my daughter, and we just kind of check out all the dogs. My daughter was enamored by a Bulldog. She loved them. And I started thinking about, like, oh, man, it'd be really nice to have a dog that was quality enough to show. And so we end up finding a place, and it's 5.25 acres, kind of surrounded by woods, only had one neighbor, and that's where I'm at now. And so I started kind of him-hawing about maybe picking up a dog to show. My daughter was kind of into it. And so we get over to the new place. Well, of course, we get over to the new place, and I don't know if it was a change of environment or just the dogs maturing, but those two males start getting chippy with each other. And, we were managing it, but we eventually had a big incident where we were gone for the day, and my son was just kind of like he was maybe 12 or 13 years old, typical gamer kid, just kind of a bonehead, at that age, and wasn't really paying attention, let the two dogs out. It was winter time, and they were typically fine together. Well, that day, the rest of us were gone. I come home, and it looked like there was a murder scene out in the snow, and I'm like, I come in the house, I'm like, okay, there's Copper, and he's like, yeah. I was like, where's Ziggy? He's like, oh, I haven't seen him. I was like, what do you mean you haven't seen him? Well, needless to say, Ziggy was outside licking his wounds in the freezing cold, hypothermic, so that was a hot mess. So we ended up getting him back in and getting him patched up, and we ended up moving on to rehoming him. One of my buddies took him for a little while until we could find him another home, and he ended up living with this single guy. Not too far from my house. It was a acquaintance of my buddies going to tire shop, and Ziggy ended up living with him and became the shop dog, and that's where he belonged because he was so laid back, and he really wasn't built for anything great. So he was just a good little step stool for somebody in their shop, and everybody come in and pet him, and he had the perfect temperament for that. Copper was Copper ended up, that dog I got out of Canton, that was 100% Johnson, the red brindle male. He ended up growing up to be like 27 inches at the withers, really beautiful headpiece, but his body almost looked like a boxer, had a real deep brisket, real narrow chest. His shoulder set was very forward. He had decent angulation, but as he matured over the years, his prey drive got almost OCD. He was fine at the development house, but when we moved out to the country, he got to the point where any little thing that moved, if he saw it, he would hyper focus on it, to the point where over the years, as he got older, I couldn't even get him to come back into the house because he wouldn't let me grab him to pull him into the house. He'd stay out there full winter, all summer. He'd just lay down in the garage and he'd wait for something to move, and then he'd be on it. If he treat a squirrel, he'd sit out there for 2 days and stare at the tree. I've seen squirrels jump out of the tree at 30 feet and hit the ground trying to escape him because he just treat them for forever. And he had his fair share of kills and over the years, and just the random possum, raccoon, it just whatever would get on the property, he'd get his hands on, he'd get after it. So, we finally get settled into the new place. I'm going to shows. There was a man I had met back in probably 2007 or 8. There was a guy, Rick Roberts, Ohio Valley Bulldogs. He was in Southern Ohio. And I don't remember how I met him initially, but I had been down to his yard long time ago. Now, my only experience with these dogs at this point is I had that 100% Johnson male, Bred. Then I moved into some of that hybrid stuff with the Freddy Krueger son, which was Bach. And then I had Copper, but this was pre-Copper. And I went down to Rick's house to look at some pups, and he had this dog, Jack Sparrow, and I had never seen an American Bulldog that looked like this dog. And he was really kind of the predecessor to some of the what I'll call more extreme bully. He kind of reminded me of Spike from Tom and Jerry, just kind of real bobbleheady, short backed, kind of lower to the ground. He wasn't anything like I'd ever seen. And I was kind of smitten on that dog. I was like, oh man, it would always be cool to have something off of him. And coming full circle, I decided I wanted to get a show dog, and I know Rick had gone to the shows, and he was capable of maybe producing a dog that would do all right. And I think I'm not sure how I got lined up that he had a litter, or I think it was a pup back deal is what it was. He got a couple pups back for maybe another gentleman using his stud or something, and he had this little female that we ended up picking up, and her name was Scarlet. Man, she was a beautiful little typey dog. There's a picture of her somewhere, or maybe even a video of my daughter showing her early on. And so we started raising this pup up and taking her to the shows. And, she was doing okay. She wasn't anything. She wasn't going to win Supreme Grand Champ anytime soon, but she was a nice little typey dog, and I was pretty excited about her because she had a good set for a foundation. Now, in my head, I was never in the mindset that I was going to get into breeding dogs. I just wanted to get out there and do something with them. I was over the years, even with Bach and Copper, I mountain biked, I trail rode all the time, and I would drag my Boxer and Bach out and run those dogs. I would do 6 miles, they would do 12 in pretty much any weather. I mean, I had never really experienced any of the breathing problems or anything that other people now, talk about kind of regularly. So, I mean, I was out doing stuff with my dogs constantly, just whether it was just running them, free running them, or biking them, just whatever. So, So we got that female, start showing her. Well, we had an accident with her. And she ended up passing from the injuries, and it was unfortunate because I ended up, the short story is I ended up accidentally running over the dog. Unbeknownst to me, she got under my truck and rolled, and we rushed her to the med vet, and she had collapsed lungs and broken ribs, and they were like, look, we could throw a ton of money into this dog, but I can't guarantee you she's going to live. I was like, I can't do that financially to my family. I was like, as bad as it sounds, we're going to have to put her down. So we did, which sucked. I had to go back to Rick and tell him what the situation was. Be honest with him. So in the meantime, going to the shows, I had met a woman. Her name was Cindy. She was a French Canadian. She lived north of Montreal. And I met her at the shows because I was just really enamored by her dogs. I had never seen, now I'm going to these shows a little bit, so I've got a little bit of a taste of what's out there. And I had never seen anything like hers. She had a female named India. She was probably 12 or 13 months old, and she looked like a boxer on steroids, which kind of in my mind, I was always kind of that boxer fan, but now I just kind of had evolved back into these bulldogs, and the temperament on the bulldogs were easy to me. They made sense to me. The way they worked and the way I worked mentally, it just seemed to work. And she had another male, a young male. His name was Gold. And she had another female, B. All of them were super athletic. They just looked like they could actually do something. And that's really what I was into. I was never really a sedentary guy, so I always wanted a dog that really could go out and perform. And fortunately for me, I don't know if it was luck or what it was, but the dogs that I had were always capable of just going out and going full balls to the wall, and I never had to worry about heat stroke or anything else. They were just, let's do it and pack them up in the truck and go home, and we'll all take a nap and we're back at it again. You know what I mean? So I never really had those issues, but her dogs really stood out to me, and somehow we ended up befriending each other at the shows. And it kind of worked into a mutual agreement. To the initial plan was that because she was so far north in Canada, most of the shows were, even if they were in Canada, they were more in like Toronto area, which was closer to me. And a lot of the shows at the time that I was doing was AVRA, which was kind of in the Midwest and Canada. It's a Canadian registry, but it kind of lived in that Midwest region, Ohio, Chicago, and then some of those Canadian things. So I was like, here's the deal. Like, if you want to pass some dogs along to me, and I ended up somehow, some way, just I kind of have a natural ability with dogs that I was able to show them really well, and I was able to train them from a very young age, which is now kind of what I'm known for as far as how my dogs behave in the ring, and just that even a 12-week-old pup, if I bring it out, it's going to stack up, it's going to follow me, it's going to do, within reason, everything that it can do as an adult. So she and I kind of come up with this harebrained scheme that she'd pass dogs down to me. I'd train them up. I'd show them. And then when we decided that they got their titles and stuff and we wanted to breed them, I'd ship them back up to her and she would do the whelping. I didn't have any interest in that stuff. I was like, man, I don't know anything about whelping litters. I don't know anything about, anything after breeding the dog. I knew nothing about. And, so that kind of started up, and we were moving dogs around. The first dog that came down to me was India, which was the dog that I was hyper focused on. When she said she was willing to let her come down, I was like beside myself. And in the meantime of all this kind of happening, once we had the accident with Scarlett, my wife felt so bad that she knew that I was really kind of interested in Linda Urban's program, and Linda was getting older. She was up in Cleveland, Urban's American Bulldogs. She's had some pretty significant dogs in history. She had Cannon and Cooter and another dog named Eli that people were using, and they were all real heavy bully stuff. And my wife kind of went behind my back at the time and reached out to Linda. Linda just happened to have a pup left in a litter. And my wife kind of surprised me and said, hey, we're going to make a trip up to Cleveland. I've got something lined up. And here I am at Linda Urban's house with this dog off of Lexi Lee, Lexi was pretty old at that time. So it was her last litter for sure. And it was Lexi Lee times Eli. And my wife had already arranged and kind of paid for this thing. And there was only one pup, so we were coming back with it. It was a little red-nosed bitch. She was pied, red and white with a red nose. And we ended up bringing her back, and she was Sugar. So Sugar was now a pup. I think I got her at like 12 weeks because it had been a little while. Linda was like her last pup. And I got India. Still got Copper floating around. Ziggy went to move on. And then, so start getting these dogs out and start showing them. India really proved to be something that I could never imagine. The dog, honestly, she's probably once in a lifetime dog for me. She's still kicking. She's 11 years old now. But she just was not built like other American Bulldogs. Super tight skin, just thin, shredded. When I got her, she had just come off a blockage surgery at 13 months old. So she was pretty emaciated. I worked her back up and then kind of got her fat and then kind of dialed her back in and conditioned her. And she's that kind of a blue fawn bitch, kind of has a boxer-esque look to her. But she, the athleticism and the intelligence on the dog were just beyond what I could have ever imagined. I've watched her close other dogs down like a lion in in a safari, just killing prey. Just absolute intensity, the prey drive, extremely dog aggressive when she was younger. Which actually made it hard to show her because I'd take her to a show and she would get so intense and so tense physically that moving her around to stack her or do anything was almost impossible because she would be so hyper-focused on the dog in front of her, I couldn't get her to relax enough to really do anything. Her biggest fault, I think, in the general public's eye was she kind of lacked type. You could tell, everyone could tell that she was a superior animal just from the outside looking in, regardless of what breed she was. But as far as like comparative to other Bulldogs in her generation, she just didn't fit the part, and she didn't really fit the part of her pedigree except for her mother. She was an exact clone to the T of her mother. And then obviously now that I'm getting into this a little more, I started getting into the pedigrees, and India she was a line bred 3-2 breeding on Bruce with Steel Curtain. He had a dog with Smokehouse Brown. that she was the result of going down through that pedigree. So she was built to produce, or actually I take that back. She was line bred on Steel Curtain's Bouncer. Smokehouse was a pup off of him. But and then Sugar from Linda was I think a 3-3 on Carly from Lice. So both of these dogs were kind of built to produce. They weren't scatterbred. And then so we're rolling. I'm showing these dogs. We're doing our thing, just we're meeting people now. We're kind of getting entrenched, the ABRA. Picked up Cindy ended up having a litter off Bumblebee and Gold. And Gold was off of breeding from Danny Frost, who was simply incredible American Bulldogs. Danny at the time had a male that was real popular, Studebaker. And he if I remember correctly, I think there was some questionable temperament with him. He was a little bit hot, but I tell you what, when I saw Danny, anytime Danny had a litter of pups and you saw the pups, just the pups themselves look like quality. You just didn't feel like there was going to be a waiting period to see if the pups popped and turned into something. It just looked like liquid gold from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And so Gold was off of one of her breedings. I think it was an inbreeding or maybe a line breeding on Jungle Juice. I can't remember. It might have been an inbreeding on Studebaker to his daughter. But that produced a group of pups that was just a pair. It was a male and a female, and I went up and grabbed both pups and brought them back with the intention that, okay, we're let's train them up, see who's worth keeping and who's not. And they were two heavily brindled pups because Gold was heavily brindled and B was a black pigment red bitch. And so that was kind of what set the foundation of the program. The female pup of those two, we ended up naming Ruby. And, through Ruby's growth, which never really did get real big, or tall, I should say, but through her growth, man, I wanted to sell the dog 10 times over. I swear. I showed her and she was okay, and I had mixed reviews on her and this and that, and I didn't really know where my heart was with her. The dog drove me crazy, and her litter mate, who Cindy had named Go-Go, the male, I couldn't stand him. I'm not a huge puppy guy to begin with. I just don't find myself drawn towards puppies, but that particular male, man, he sent me over the edge. So I remember talking to Cindy. I was like, look, we gotta move this male on. He's sending me over the edge. So she ended up selling the dog, I think, to someone up in Nova Scotia, which became a whole ordeal because by this point he was 5 or 6 months old and he had to get on a plane and I had to ship him off, and it was a big old pain in the ass, but we ended up doing it, and I think he's still living a good life up there. But so that was the foundation. I had India, I had Sugar, and I had Ruby, and hitting all the ABRA shows. I don't think I missed many. Starting to meet people along the way, met some great people. Judges, Tom Hare, Bob Emmel. There was plenty of people. And the biggest thing for me is I wasn't really in it for anything more than the love of dogs. I didn't really intend to have to think about how to breeding these things. It really wasn't like trying to study up, how people were breeding dogs for successes. And I was going to leave that in Cindy's court and let her make some decisions. And, fortunately for me, going to the shows and getting out and about really allowed me to compare what was out there. There was a handful of dogs that were up in Canada that were just exceptional. There was a woman named Vero who had a kennel for a while called Master Bully, and she had a dog that she had produced out of a Danish import. The female's name was Zime, and Cross was just I mean, he was a really, really nice specimen. You have a picture of him. He's an all-white dog with a solid brindle patch.
Mm-hmm.
Really, bully dog stands out. I mean, just stands out. And is a good-sized dog. And then another breeder, Julie Rascals, who's still breeding with Bully Rascals, American Bulldogs. She had a dog named Bronco. And I mean, Bronco about broke my neck looking at him so hard. I mean, he walked by, and I remember we were at an outdoor show, and I stopped the conversation that I was having to stare at this dog, and I was like, wow, okay. Like, now I see what we're up against. And now, mind you, in this period, this was the ABRA was mostly all bully stuff. Most people weren't showing standard dogs. I don't even know if they had many standard rings. It was the only thing I knew was bully dogs. I knew of the other standard, and I've seen a couple, and Cindy had a standard female. I just didn't care for it. It always looked too houndy to me. It just, the type of the dog wasn't what I was looking for aesthetically. Now, to fast forward, where I'm at now, there are standards that I really find to be extremely eye-pleasing, and I just hadn't seen them at that point. So, we're hitting the shows, we're doing our thing, trying to finish some of these dogs off for Cindy, and Cindy starts having some medical issues. And she lived in a small town north of Montreal, but she lived in a neighborhood for sure. She was cycling dogs just like most of us, crate and rotate. And this medical issue was a fairly serious one. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was kind of a mystery. And her husband really wasn't into the dogs. So she finally came to the conclusion that she was going to have to get out. That was the end result. She had a couple dogs left up there. She had Gold. She ended up rehoming him to Julie Bingham. And then B, I think she put B, maybe with somebody out in British Columbia, another breeder. And then along the way, we had picked up another pup. We named her. Her name was Bugatti. We called her Boogie. She was one of those pups from Danny that, at first glance as a pup, you could tell she was going to be a winner right off the rip. But man, I brought her. I think I picked her up and had her at the house for a few weeks before I got her to Cindy. And man, she was resource garden food. She was hell on wheels, and it was down from that Studebaker stuff. And I knew this was going to be a dog that needed to be in the right hands. She ended up selling her to a lady out on the West Coast, Andrea. And so she kind of cleared house, and I stuck with Ruby in India. And now my plan was kind of a bust because Cindy was out of the game, and now I've got these dogs, and I was like, okay, now I guess I'm the breeder, and I was like, okay, so that's when I started doing a deep dive on what was out there and what did I really want to see, and what was eye pleasing to me and who was doing it as best as I thought it could be done. And that's kind of where I started to latch on to Jeff Daly's stuff. Jeff Daly, for me, I think I've met him once in passing at an NKC National show, kind of not too many years ago, maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now. But, his dogs, I don't know. There's probably only a handful of people that have really set out and claimed a bloodline that is so recognizable that, you'd have to be foolish not to know where it came from or where the blood came from. Mm-hmm. Jeff has some way over the years has just systematically crunched down on stuff to get pretty damn consistent results. And there were a couple males still kind of out there, I guess to digress a little bit, but I fast forward now, where I'm at now, I've over the years, I've tried to collect memorabilia or anything to get my hands on that kind of gives me some insight to the days of old, the days that I kind of was too busy with life to be involved with Bulldogs and trying to catch up on what it was back then. And I ended up getting most of the American Bulldog reviews and some of the National Bulldogger magazines. And I sit down in the evenings and I thumb through those things and see who was out and about. The heyday, I think, in this breed was really like that 99 to maybe started to dwindle, maybe 2012, 13. But that little period of time, man, people were really on top of their game. Everyone was putting either weight pull titles, Schützen titles, the show titles. Everybody that was advertising studs was really making sure the dogs were going to perform with what they should be doing for what the breed standard was. And, I never really got involved with the boards and all that stuff with the Boulevard and all the craziness that went down there. There was just constant accusations of people bickering. And I'm just not a guy for that shit. I'm a very transparent guy. I'll steer clear of that kind of nonsense. Mm-hmm. And in the dog world, being so fickle as it is, if you use someone's stud, you're now on their team. Like that's just the way people envision you. It's so you have to be careful how you navigate. So I get to the point where India's getting to an age where I want a breeder, and I'm hunting around for studs. I didn't really know Jeff, but I knew the blood, and I knew some other people that had been working with it, over the years. And the problem with Jeff's stuff is that they had their issues here and there. Hips were kind of a routine thing that could be washed out. And back then everyone was checking the hips and really up on that kind of stuff. I was surprised to see that when I got deeper into those magazines, how much people really took into account hips and stuff. And so I finally kind of settled in on India's first breeding, and that was with Tom Hare had a dog named Hardy. Hardy was, a quintessential daily dog, pretty good sized dog, not too tall, maybe 22 inches, real typey, full of himself, 100% full of himself. Now, to remind you, India is a very hot, dominant dog. And I had some concerns. I called Tom up, and, Tom's a good guy, but he wants to get his dog used and see what's going to happen. And we talked about temperament, and I think he was honest with me enough to say, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I didn't mind a hot dog. I loved when they were all puffed up and had issues with other animals, and that didn't bother me at all. I loved the gaminess of the dogs and that prey drive to get out. And my property has a decent amount of woods, and I've got access to other woods, so I was out running my dogs constantly and watching them, just kind of innately what's in their instincts to do around other animals. And we had our collection of minks and rabbits and you name it.
Right.
But so I get with Tom. We decided to pull the trigger on this thing. I think it was like the weekend before Thanksgiving. A progesterone test, do all the, got her hips done, had all the health testing done, passed and cleared, all that good stuff. Go out to Jersey Shore where Tom was at. We get there and try to get these two together, and we're kind of concerned because both dogs are hot. And I'm like, well, if she doesn't submit to him, we're going to have a fucking mess on our hands because she's going to whoop his ass. She was bigger than him, taller, probably about the same mass. India was about a 24-inch bitch and probably at a super low body fat, probably a 75 to 77-pound dog. And just full of herself, piss and vinegar. So we get together, and poor Hardy, man, he fucking tried to fuck her. Just pardon my language, but he tried to tie her so bad to the point where I thought he was going to die. And so we were like, let's just take a break. It's wintertime. It's cold. So we're kind of shivering. We're in his garage. And I'm like, let's just cut the dogs loose in the backyard and let them get some fresh air and run. Well, no sooner did we do that. Of course, two dogs tied, and we're outside in the freezing cold. I got my daughter with me, which was her first. My daughter's watched more dog breedings than most people probably should, but she was there. She was there with me, and we got the breeding done and packed it up. And over the years, we've done a lot of these little travel breedings and whatnot with different studs. And I'd bring my daughter, and we'd always try to turn it into like a little trip. So we went down to the Jersey Shore, whatever, on that trip, come back. So now it's the week of Thanksgiving, and Sugar goes into heat. And at the time, the way that we were running the dogs, I had runs outside, but we would bring the dogs in at night, crate them, and then cut them loose in the morning. We had a little system where I'd go down to the runs with their food, and I'd text my son, cut so-and-so loose, cut so-and-so loose, cut so-and-so loose. Well, little did I know when I left, Sugar comes into heat, or she had been moving through her heat, and I told him to cut Kingston and Sugar loose, and typically they just come right down. They run right into their respective kennels. They get fed. They're good. This day, it's 4 days after I just do this breeding, these two blow right past the kennels and take off into the woods. And I'm calling them. They're not coming back, and I'm like, okay, well, shit. So I'm like, poorly dressed. It's cold out. I go back in the house, suit up. I'm out in the woods. Well, I see what looks like Sugar laying down and Kingston sitting right behind her. And I'm like, yo, what are you guys doing? They're on the other side of this creek. So I got to trudge to the creek. Yep. They're tied in the middle of the woods. I'm like, son of a bitch. So needless to say, now I've got 2 breedings done. And within 4 days, I've never whelped a litter yet. So I'm like, okay, this is going to get interesting. So go back in the house, and shit happens. If you've been in dogs long enough, you'll learn that shit happens. And so I go back in the house. A couple weeks go by, build 2 whelping boxes, set up 2 whelping areas. I'm like, okay. Fast forward, India goes into labor, whelp that litter. I think we had a litter of 7 or 8 with Hardy. Kingston ties. Kingston was a dog. I guess I didn't say that, but Kingston was a male that I picked up off of Vero Master Bully Kennel. She had a litter at some point along the way with a dog named Doc, which was in Cincinnati, in Ohio, with a lady with Boss's American Bulldogs. Doc was off of a breeding, I think, that Maggie, in conjunction with her, had done. So it was off of Gunslinger stuff and kind of filtered back down through. And then Vero does this breeding with Doc and Zime, which is crosscut smother. And I don't know, she didn't have much action on the pups, but she decided she was going to sell these pups for $600. And I was like, I bet I'll pick one up. So another friend of mine that I had met over the years, Amy Meyer with Outcast Bullies, she ends up picking one up, and they were friends, Vero and Amy. And then Maggie was taking one. So I ended up trekking all the way up to Montreal, because where Vero's from as well, and grabbing all 3. She talks me into bringing the other 2 pups back to the States for her, which I was sweating, because I had gone back and forth to Cindy's numerous times. And every time I went across that border, they yanked me in. And it was a whole process, talk about the dogs, why you got this, what you doing? And, it was a whole ordeal. And it just, after enough of that, you kind of have a conditioned response to not wanting to do that anymore. And so she talks me into bringing these pups back. So Kingston was a product of that. I distributed the other 2 pups. And so I whelp, but I basically go back to back with these whelps. I produced 15 pups out of the two litters, and it was absolute hell. I learned real quickly why you don't have 2 litters at once. And ironically enough, that accidental breeding produced a dog named Prophet, who is kind of the face of my program. I don't know if it was just the stars aligning or what, but that pup came out. I kept him. And then I kept a male out of the other litter, India's first litter. I let all the females go because I figured all my females were still pretty young. And then it was kind of off and running with those guys. There was a bunch of series of breedings after that that I ran through. So initially, I guess we talked about it was basically India to a daily male. And then it was Sugar to Kingston. Kingston was a myriad of hybrid pedigree. He had a plethora of both sides of the standard in there. And he himself led towards the bullier side. And then after that, it was kind of like, okay, now where do we go? So I ended up using Sugar, a couple out in Wisconsin, the Metzes. I'd never met them personally, but I had seen their dogs on Facebook. And they had a nice young male named Beater, and in the meantime, she had decided to part with Crosscut, and Crosscut went out to them at the Metz's, but they had this young male Beater who was a Wrecking Bull son, Wrecking Bull being off of Troy with Cold Country, American Bulldogs. Troy was kind of running in that circle with Vito and Jeff, and Tom, and another guy named Steve Green. So they all kind of had some touch on this Daily Blood, and they'd all been working it one way or another. I'm pretty sure they had all washed out some dogs along the way, but they all had really nice dogs. And Beater was really, really exceptional. I had always wanted something off a Wrecking Bull. Now, come full circle, full disclosure, there's been a little bit of turmoil within the American Bulldog community around Wrecking Bull and Vito and some of that stuff. And I know Vito kind of touched on it in some of his interviews, and that's not my story to tell. But Beater, as far as the dog himself, he matched up really nicely with Sugar. Sugar had really matured into a dog that conformationally was super correct. She wasn't overly bully. She wasn't overly big, tight skin. She came down off of Mufasa, and Mufasa kind of threw that heavy muscle, which I hadn't really seen what was the potential of that muscle yet, because I had just had this first 2 litters and these pups were young. I was taking them out. The pups were getting a lot of notice, and they were doing really well at the shows. So I'd call up the Metz's. I talked to Dan. Dan at the time, he's probably not the most people person friendly, I guess would be the way to describe it. So he was a little short with me, but we kind of, by the end of the conversation, I think he felt like, well, yeah, he's a nice enough guy as any, and if he's willing to do all the work and come out to Wisconsin to breed this dog, I'll entertain it. If he's going to pay me, so be it. So me and my daughter pack up Sugar the next time. It wasn't the next heat, but it was the next time we planned on breeding. And we roll out to the Metz's in Wisconsin. It was the dead of winter. Once again, we find ourselves out on a deck. We threw down a piece of carpet, and we're trying to get Beater to tie Sugar. Sugar's all about it. She's ready. Progesterone tested her. She was good to go. And poor Beater, he just couldn't get the tie done. I don't know that dog ever got a tie done in his life. But he couldn't get a live tie done. So we spent a couple days out there. And Dan, fortunately, he was kind of quasi-retired from wherever he had worked before, but he was doing some work at a veterinarian's office locally, and he was like, I think we can get them to do a AI. So we kind of made some arrangements, headed over there, and that was the first time I'd ever seen anybody do an AI. So we, collect Beater. She confirmed his sperm was good, and she does this thing, and she didn't, now in hindsight, after so many years, she didn't do the greatest job, and most of the semen just flew back out all over the floor. But brought Sugar back, played the waiting game. She only had 3 pups. One was dead at birth, and ended up with 2 pups, and we called them Buzz and Woody. And one of those dogs went on to be Rocky, which is a really beautiful male. The other one went to a pet home and really turned into a super typey dog. With that being said, Dan was, he not to say that he felt bad, but he was like, you know what, man, you really didn't get much of a litter off of it. The circumstances weren't the greatest. If you want to come back and use Beater again on her next heat, we'll honor that. And I was like, oh, that's nice of you. And in the meantime, they had acquired Crosscut, which I had seen when I was out at their house. And, I kind of, in my head, I was going to go a different direction with India's next breeding, but I said, you know what, Dan? I said, if you're open to it, why don't we just breed Crosscut to India instead of trying to do this thing again? And he agreed to it. So, when time came about, did the same damn thing, packed it up 10 hours one way to their house. And by this time now we're friendly with each other, and we had communicated more on Facebook, following the litter and all that stuff. And it was a little easier. Daughter's with me again. And, old Crosscut, he wasn't going to miss a tie. So he put it on her. And that created the second litter for both of those females. And now, from the first litter, Prophet and another dog that I kept off of India's, which we ended up naming a Biggie. both dogs had really started to take on their own life, and Prophet at 10 months was mature as any 3-year-old American Bulldog on the planet, and he was shredded. Super heavy shoulder set. His rear end didn't match his shoulders so much, but man, he's the dog that you see standing all the time. That just looks like he's been, yoking weights for the last 10 years. I mean, he is just, and he's still that way to this day. He's 8 years old and he's still shredded. And, now where Prophet started to fall short is, you kind of get into the standard thing with these dogs, which is a weird place to be. But in the show ring, you got the bully, you got the standard side. Well, in the meantime, the ABRA kind of started – the lady that ran the ABRA started making some wackadoo choices, and a lot of people were exiting the show scene from the ABRA. And in the meantime, I had been courted to come down to the NKC shows. Most of those shows were in the southern United States, North Carolina, Alabama. There was a handful that happened in Ohio, but primarily it was all going south. And so we had started kind of going down to the NKC, and that's when Prophet and Biggie were small pups, and kind of picked up a new family down there. Those guys were really open to bringing me in. Now I had literally flipped the coin. I went from a fully bully registry to almost a show that had way more standard dogs. All those guys were running hogs, and they all had standard programs. You had Don Matthews down there. Alan was down there. Joshua Kennels. You had Bruce down there. All those guys were coming to the shows, and they all had standard dogs. And everyone kind of looked at me like, oh, we got a new guy here, and he's got all bully dogs, but they're not super bully. They're kind of athletic bully, which is interesting. And then I had this tweener, Prophet. Prophet ended up being this somewhere in between the standards. He kind of, as a pup, he showed standard, and he did well as a pup standard, but once he got to an adult, he didn't have the bite on the standard side. He was a little too bulky, I guess, if you would, to be considered a true standard, and he moved like a bully dog. So he didn't, the standard side, that standard rings, those dogs, they all float. They're all really, really light on their feet. So Prophet kind of got left off in the show side of things. He had a super puppy career, and then as he started to mature as an adult, he really couldn't hang. Not that he wasn't a very nice animal. He just didn't have a home, if you will. And then Biggie on the other side, Biggie was just really hitting his stride. It took a long time for him to really put on some mass, and when he did, he was super light on his feet. He had the movement of a standard dog, but on the bully side, which came down from India, and he went on to become a grand champ. I think he was 2 wins away from Supreme before I ended up having to retire him. And he, I started, got these breedings going on, and Biggie just killing it. Dog moved like, no pun intended, like a greyhound. And decided I was going to put him on Ruby, who was coming up. Ruby really didn't have a great show career in the ABRA with the bully group. Brought her down to the NKC group, and she just started taking off. She was one of the hardest dogs I've ever owned as far as muscle. And if you look through the pictures, you can see that there's a lot to compare to on a scale of muscles. And I've always kind of been known for my conditioning. I've always been kind of known for the condition of my dogs, and then for secondly, the training within the show arena. But Ruby went on to be a grand champion herself. She ended up taking best of breed at nationals one year. I mean, she had a really storied career. So I was looking to pair those two dogs up with each other. I was going to take that daily stuff, mix it back in with Danny stuff. I really didn't want to line breed on that. And went and got Big. I went down to a show one time, got Biggie's hips done at Maggie's doctor, and became back mild dysplastic. So that was a big kick in the dick. I had gotten this dog 2 wins away from Supreme, which he would have went on to get. And, I kind of hawed. I talked to other breeders, and I said, what would you do? Some people, I got OFA there. You should get pen hip. I'm like, well, what if I get okay results there? Then, what am I picking? What is it for up to me to pick the better of the two results? Or so in just with who I am and how I felt about breeding and putting good dogs, healthy dogs on the ground, I think I would have felt really guilty if I would have had a dog come out, with some hip issues. So I ended up neutering him and selling him for $500 and putting him on someone's couch, and he's a coffee table to this day. And so that kind of left me kind of moving around, and I really didn't have anything off that first breeding left over because I didn't keep a female. So I really kind of, for a while there, just kind of started moving into the sugar stuff, and between Sugar and Prophet, mother-son, just kind of bouncing back and forth. But those two dogs, Sugar ended up, I guess not to go through every breeding, but India ended up doing 3 breedings. I did the crosscut litter, I did the Hardy litter, and then I ended up breeding her to Kingston. Crosscut and Kingston were half brothers. And so I was kind of setting myself up for the future to maybe really do something tight. And what I found out over those 3 litters with India was she's probably one of the most consistent producing dogs of her generation. I mean, I could put up, she had maybe 21 to 23 pups, somewhere in that range, maybe a little bit more. If I put up every dog in front of you, it's undeniably who they come from. And they all look within a slight variance of degree. They all look exactly the same. It's kind of uncanny. I've never really had that experience with any other dogs that I've bred. And then Sugar, inversely, Sugar couldn't produce a damn female to save her life. But she went on to produce, I ended up breeding her 4 times. She had 2 small litters, so she ended up getting bred 4 times. And she produced some just Prophet, and there was a numerous other dogs, Rocky, that were just outstanding males. I mean, some people got some outstanding dogs from her as pets that just went into the abyss that nobody saw on the show scene, just from the updated pictures and trying to keep up with Instagram and stuff. But she did end up producing later on in some of those smaller litters a couple females that I kept by default. 2 of which I have today. They're older females and never been bred. One was a result of, another breeding where I had Prophet and Sugar end up next to each other, and Prophet got, Kingston was a what do you call that? An escape artist on a good day. Well, it passed right into his son. Prophet ate through a welded wire kennel to get to Sugar. One day I came out and he's standing in her run, and I was like, well, that's a problem. And got that situation remedied, and clearly she was in heat, and I'm assuming they had tied. Well, we watched her, and she never looked pregnant. And one day I came out and I heard something weird coming out of my building, and it was pups, and she had 3 pups, 3 inbred mother to son pups. One of the best litters I ever put down on the ground. Just by happenstance, again, I had 2 bully dogs and a standard dog out of that. And that dog, both I've kept a male and a female out of that. Sold one of the standard female I sold. But those 2 dogs are kind of up and coming. They're 3 or 4 years old now, and still not used. But definitely have the genetics now crunched down to where they have real good value to me. And, over the years, I guess I did a bunch of these kind of outcross breedings in the beginning. And then I started really experimenting probably in the last 4 to 5 years with line breeding, inbreeding, and seeing what results I had. I've had really, really, really good results inbreeding on India. Produced a litter that's now a year old down the line. That was in India, half brother to half sister, with on the backside had Crosscut and Kingston. So we had 2 half brothers bred down back to a half brother, half sister up close. So it was that really has produced well. It produced all males, and they're all exactly almost clones of each other, with some little nuance differences, which I kept the dog off of that. And Prophet's gone on to have probably 5 or 6 litters, a couple off yard with guest females. I think his first litter we did off yard was with a friend of mine, Melissa Garone, Top Gun Bulldogs. She had a female Ariel that came down off of Bionics and some of Maggie's stuff. and that litter really turned out well. Produced a dog named Kruger. Kruger went on to be, I think, 2021 Dog of the Year, NKC Supreme Grand Champ. He's a bigger, supersized, if it's possible, version of Prophet. And then he did I did another breeding with a guy that had a female off of Boyd's Alaskan Blizzard. It was the last litter he had sired at like 12 years old, which he coincidentally had died not that far behind that litter. And that litter really turned out kind of obscure. There was only 3 pups, but they were extremely bully, which was surprising because he himself was, I guess, qualified as a standard, but the pedigree was mixed. And then subsequently I bred him to other dogs in the yard and really have some outstanding pups from Prophet. And what I've learned over the years, I really hold the females in the highest regards. For me personally, I place almost every litter I keep a male and a female. Every litter I place males in as many places as I can, just to let them mature and do their thing on someone's couch. I've pulled dogs off of couches and gone to shows and got best in breed. And I've had some dogs I've pulled off couches, try to put them in a dog show, and they probably try to eat somebody. But needless to say, there's a lot of really nice males out there. All the females I keep on property just because, I've loved a couple guest bitches, and that's a different type of whelping. You might find yourself in a bit of a war in the middle of having pups, but I like to have that relationship. I really hold the females in the highest regard as far as temperament. I just want them to be mature. I'm at a point now in my breeding where I don't need to breed a dog at 18 months old. Typically, you won't see me breed a female till they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And I'll try to get a couple breedings off of them and see where they go. I've kind of, the way that I've maneuvered through the years is once I started having males that I wanted to use myself, I would take that male to 1, 2, or 3 different females, see how it produces, hang that male up for a little bit, and then go back to another male for 2 or 3 breedings, see how that male produces, and then revisit the body of work and kind of evaluate what worked and make sure nobody's having, issues physically or, nothing's popping up that I should be aware of. And fortunately, I've had really good owners through the years and everybody communicates well. And I've been able to kind of follow along with almost every single production that I have out there. Mm. That's kind of where I've gotten to this point. I'm at a point where I'm kind of bred so tight that I'm going off yard the next year or so. I'm hoping the dog market picks up to where we can, get a few more litters down. I've been kind of limiting myself to 1, maybe 2 litters a year just because the dog market after COVID seems like it's kind of fell off. I don't know if the breed has fell out of favor or it's just the market in general, but
I think it's inevitably going to pick back up because I think because of COVID and things like that, it was a reminder of how unsure the world is. And yep. With, looting, even though people were, so worried about toilet paper more than anything else, which I don't understand.
It got weird. I mean, I felt like during COVID, a lot of people were home and I was selling dogs pretty quickly. And then it was about probably 2021 going into 22 where I started to see people sitting on pups. People are having, and I'm talking reputable breeders that seemingly have never had issues selling pups. You could see they were starting to have some lingering pups here and there. And I watch all that stuff. I don't really talk dogs so much with people too much anymore. I know everybody gets involved in the beginning. It's your life. You talk it, you breathe it, you live it. You kind of weather that storm and you kind of get to a point where you realize real quick that you got to make decisions for your own breeding program. You can't, people's word and that is all. You can only take it at face value. You got to get out and see dogs. You got to see them in person. You got to. I go to dog shows and there's a lot of times I really don't pay attention to the rings. I'm watching when the people are outside of the rings and they're waiting with their dog, what that dog's doing, how it's surveying the land, how the owner interacts with it, what the real temperament of it is. If I get a chance, I'm usually pretty busy at a show showing myself. So if I get a chance to notice somebody else's dog in the ring, I'll try to pay attention. And if I'm not in the bigger rings at the end of the show, I'll make sure that I'm over there, seeing what the top dogs of that day were. The unfortunate truth is that just like anything, and I think it's just a sign of the times that people in dogs don't feel the necessity to get out. They feel like they've seen enough dogs on the internet, so they can compare their dogs in that fashion, and it's just not realistic. I've seen pictures of dogs that I've seen in person that are two totally different dogs, and I mean, you gotta lay your hands on them, you gotta see them, you gotta know what these dogs are about. There's just been a lot of dogs, even popular studs that I've seen, that the temperaments are not exactly what you would maybe care for, depending on what your breeding program's looking for. And you got to take that into account. And the only way to do that is to get out and see where these dogs are at. Whether you're going to visit someone's yard, and hopefully, people will make the time for you, which I think a lot of people that I know and deal with dogs would make that time for most people starting off. But I just think a lot of people haven't really, they just don't feel the need to do it anymore. And it was a lot different when the dog shows were 100 dogs. Now you're lucky to get 35, 40 dogs at a show. And, guys like me, I show up, I might bring 6-10 dogs. You know what I mean? So I could be 25% of the show in some instances, which is not how it should be.
Right.
I try to make my time and my effort. If I'm showing up, I'm going to bring everything that I could possibly shove in a trailer or a truck safely. And depending on how much help I have and if I'm running solo, but safely travel, 8-9 hours away. I'm going to bring what I can. I want to get my dogs out. I want to, it's a bit of a pride thing, but it's also just, let's get out and do it. Like, not every dog's a perfect show dog, and I'm not going to hang my hat that I have the best dogs out there, but I'm sure as hell going to show up and let you see them. You know what I mean? If you got questions, I'll answer it.
There you go.
But there's just a lot of people aren't doing that anymore, and there's just a lot of internet warriors that have dogs that think they're something special, but they haven't even been to a dog show, or maybe they've been to one and they don't know what's on the other side of the country, or, it was a big rude awakening for me to even move from the ABRA to the NKC. I mean, it really changed my mindset on dogs, and I've listened to some of your other, interviews, not just the American Bulldog stuff, but, some of the pits and the, I think the one guy was doing bull mastiffs, but the mindset is always different with every dog, man. It's always different. Every dog woman, even, it's different. And there's little nuggets with everybody that you got to pick up. And if you don't go to the show, you're not going to see Bruce Huffmaster in person. You're not going to see Alan and have a conversation. You're not going to see Don Matthews and have a conversation with those guys. And it's one thing to pick up a phone, and if they'll entertain a phone call, that's one thing. But when they see you consistently showing up over the years, and whether they love your dogs or hate your dogs, they have respect for you showing up. And you can have a conversation with them, and, they might give you a little tidbit of something that you can hold on to, and it might push your kennel in a great direction. And, those guys, whether you love their dogs or hate their dogs or what your opinion on them, they've been around a long time, and they can tell you something that works, something that's going to get you in the right direction. And that's why I like listening to different people's perspective. It's funny to me because I've got the way that I do my thing, and, with dogs and health and keeping and husbandry and all the stuff that goes with owning these animals. And then you listen to somebody else and they have a totally different take on it. And you're like, whoa, okay, this is a different way of thinking about it. All right, cool. Maybe I'll have to take that in consideration.
So for your program, are you basically a hybrid program, or are you aiming one direction?
My heart is in what Vito talks about, is that performance bully dog. The unfortunate truth is Ohio it's kind of become the epicenter of extreme American Bulldogs. Don't get me wrong, the West Coast has its scene as well. But there, Rick Roberts, Chuck Spencer, Bruce, who's not in Ohio, with Steel Curtain. I think he's in Pittsburgh. There was a lady for years, Titan Tough, American Bulldogs. All those guys just bred these really kind of extreme dogs, and that never really was I love looking at them, but it wasn't what my heart was around. And really what I've always just wanted to produce was just a bully dog that really functions well. Now, with that being said, in order to get the function well, you kind of have to back off the type, because you'll slide right down the slippery slope of having the same issues as these guys do. And I've learned over the years that, my stuff off of India is a lot leaner muscle. They don't really get the mass that some of these other dogs have. But just like any track star versus a bodybuilder, the track star's built to perform, and the bodybuilders, they've got a sprint in them. Don't get me wrong. The bodybuilder has a sprint in them, but they don't have that long game. They're not doing a 12-mile AD. They're not really going to be able to go all day and do it. And where I live, there's no means for me to hunt my dogs, and I don't have enough physical time to trial my dogs in bite work. So I've touched on doing the bite work stuff a little bit, and a lot more on the obedience side with some of my dogs. But the reality of it is a full-time job, and these dogs with a full breeding program, and a full-time job, you're lucky to get anything else in. I got a little bit of personal health that I try to maintain, and that's pretty much what my day consists of. I go to work for 8 to 10 hours away from the house. I get home, eat dinner real quick, maybe get in a lift, and then it's out dealing with the dogs, whether it's just chores or working them. But for me, the program's been about performance bully dogs. And I've used a lot of hybrid pedigrees and tried to keep to the bullier side of the pedigree within reason. But, it really, breeding's just kind of it can be a crapshoot. If you're working with one blood for a long time, and you'll start to kind of get used to its nuances. And then just like this last breeding I did, inbred on that dog Bronco that I talked about that I loved, it was the female that I have was a product of a Bronco son bred to a Bronco daughter. And she's a really typey bully dog, small, clean breathing, extremely muscled up, lean. And I bred her to Prophet, who has mostly a bully pedigree, but has some hybrid stuff. And I got kind of a 50-50 split. Now, the pups are still young. So, time's going to tell with how they mature and how they kind of, some of this blood, and when it's new to you, you got to kind of sit back and watch it. That's why I'm a big fan of, like, I'll take a bitch and I'll breed her to 3 different males, and then she'll be done, and I'll just sit back and watch, let it mature. Like, you just almost got to put it back on the shelf. Work with the dogs that you kept, see what you like about them. Sometimes they're going to wash out, rehome them, and you'll learn something from it. But when you get that new blood, it's like, I don't know what really to do. You know what I mean? You kind of have to sit back and kind of watch and see what's going to happen with it. And, stuff will pop off. You may not get exactly what you want in the breeding with this bitch, but you might get it with her daughter. You know what I mean? What you expected to get in the first breeding, you might end up finding in the second. Mm-hmm. So, patience. And I'm still, genetics is a funny thing. So, I just really try to I have a plan that I keep in place. I've looked at people like Vito. I track how they've bred dogs. Jeff's another one that I track how, like, looking at the pedigrees, what he's done and what it's the outcome. Not to say that I'm going to use his blood or breed those dogs, but just the outcomes of success doing 3-2 or a 3-3 or, a half brother to a half sister. And then, okay, when do you pump the brakes on that and bring something else in? And then how do you incorporate that back in? And that's kind of where I'm at with my breeding program now, but with the focus of producing these leaner, ideally for me, a male should be 75 to maybe 85 pounds. I don't really like to get them much bigger than that. And a female anywhere from 65 to 75 pounds. I'd like to try to keep the females in that 22 to 24 range. I like to keep the males at the 24 range. Does it always happen? Am I going to wash a dog out because she's 20 inches? Absolutely not. Every dog's a tool. And you kind of just have to figure out what that dog is good to produce with and move forward with it. And that's just the way it is.
Well, when it comes to the history of the American Bulldog, I get a lot of, I believe this is what happened, or according to what I've studied, this is what happened. What's your take?
My take is, that I don't know how to say this. I'll just kind of put it out there, but my take is it really doesn't matter. I'm so far removed from how it got started. I don't have any control of that. All I can do right now is control that the dogs that are in front of me, knowing that the pedigrees in my yard are true. If I was going to make a guess, it's a breed that was cobbled together from dogs that exhibited a certain mentality and a certain workability, and maybe secondly, enough of a type to start putting those dogs together. I'm sure there was a core foundation in the Old English and the Old Whites and the White English, whatever they wanted to call them. I'm sure there was some terrier put in there, and at this point, we've kind of rode the course of the history. It's just been, realistically, it's do I call it a designer breed? It probably was for its time. It was set out to preserve something. I think it quickly moved into designing something, and that's kind of my take on it. The greatest thing about American Bulldogs is also the worst thing about American Bulldogs. The greatest thing is that within the type standard, there's a lot of play. There's a lot of variation. There's a lot of room to work. And if you're a guy that has a vision for a certain type of animal that has a temperament and a look, this is a great breed if you really want to be become a level expert breeder. But in the same respect, the breed is almost unrecognizable from one extreme of the standard side to all the way to the extreme of the bully side. You could see 1,000 dogs in front of you and not know what they are. You know what I mean? Right. And that part is a little disappointing. But for me, I can guarantee you that I would have been absolutely bored breeding boxers, Rots, Dobermans that all kind of have that same look. They don't have any variation. There's no real room to kind of move around. I love the elasticity of the environment of American Bulldogs. But to say one person's program is right, wrong, or otherwise, I've just kind of grown into the mentality that it's your program, bud. You do what you want. Now, I know where my standards lie, and that's where I want to stay. And even with the more modern crossbreeding and stuff, the allegations, maybe rumors and all that stuff, you just kind of have to maneuver through what you want to believe. You know what he knows. If you weren't in the yard, you didn't see it happen, you don't know. And people can claim one way and they can claim another way, but at the end of the day, I look at the dog that's in front of me. I look at the 3 generations behind that dog, assuming that it's true, and I can trust the pedigree in front of me. That's what I look at. I don't really get caught up past that. You know what I mean? And at this point, I'm fortunately at a point where I have enough material in my own blood that I can probably for the foreseeable future just kind of navigate in my own stuff. I am going to go off yard this year and use some other stuff, but it will only be a short stop, and I'm going to move right back into integrating it back with my stuff full time. But
so you enjoy the fact that you can almost be creative.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I for work, I'm very mathematical and I have to deal with numbers all day. But the other side of me is when I was in school, I was in school for business and I was in school for art, and I like both sides of it. I like creativity. I like graphic design. I like, keeping up my website. I've DJ'd in the past. I've just been a numerous side of the left side of my brain, but I love the mathematical side of stuff too. And, breeding kind of blends both of those possibilities together. And that's what I enjoy. Like I said, I probably would have gotten bored by now had it just been a very cookie cutter looking breed. You know what I mean? It really would have got down to nuances, and I probably would have got more involved with working the dogs because that would have been the only thing that's left to prove them, you know?
What are the general weight limits of your dogs?
Prophet totally ripped in his prime is only about 77 pounds. And I can tell you right now, that's a hard dog. That is a dog that I don't want to deal with him if he decided to do something different with me. I mean, that's about as much. I've had some of my dogs that I've produced come back as studs and spend the weekend with me that pushed closer to 90 pounds. And in my mind, I was like, wow, that's a lot of dog. I don't know that I'm 47 now and I'm in shape and I'm not, I'm a young 47. I deal with a bad back from time to time. And to be honest with you, I just don't want a bigger dog than that. I just don't find that. I feel like once you start tipping the scale at 85 and upwards, you really start to sacrifice mobility. And that's just not what I'm about. I mean, there's not taking it away from anybody else, but that's their choice. And I like a dog that can perform, I mean, I really do. I enjoy watching a dog. And the funny thing that I always see that it kind of goes back to what I said before about getting out and seeing the dogs in person. I'll see people post videos of dogs and pictures and claim athleticism in the animals. Well, I can tell you right now, you take that dog and put him up next to something down in the South, it's a hog dog. Your dog's not athletic if it's a bully dog. I can almost guarantee you that. But you don't have that perspective because you haven't gone off yard and really checked. Your dog's running and catching a ball for an hour, and you think that's athletic. And you take a dog in the woods for 6, 7, 8 hours on a hunt, and then you can tell me your dog's athletic, and I can't claim that I've been out in the woods for 8 to 9 hours with my dogs on a hunt, but I can tell you that I've sat outside and watched these dogs, and I've ran my dogs with the quad, or I've taken them trail running with myself, or I've ran them with my bike, and I've seen these dogs put 10, 12 miles on, get back, drink some water, and look at me and like, now what? And I'm totally wrecked. I'm done. Like, I can't do anything more physically, but they're still going. Now, I'm not going to claim that every dog in my breeding program is built that way, but I feel like there's different things you have to weigh as a breeder. Some dogs are just, some bitches are just absolute producers, and they outproduce themselves. And I always encourage people I usually use like a 3-strike rule, physically, mentally, temperament, all that kind of. If you get to the 3rd strike, I'm cutting you loose. We're going to rehome you. If it's a 1.5 strike thing and you're missing a little piece of the puzzle, but everything else is really dialed in, I'm gonna keep you around and see what you're worth. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna run a breeding through you, and I may like it, and I may not. I might say right away, like, yeah, I can see I'm not doing this again. But I encourage people to try to use a female to see what they're worth. I think a lot of people hang their hats on studs, and it's just not my mentality towards breeding, but I know a lot of other people circulate around the stud, and to each their own. I haven't done it that way. I've done profit the most, but the tail of the tape's still out. Breeding's a long game. You know what I mean? You can, just because most people get into breeding and they get a couple dogs and they do a couple outcrosses, and in my experience, the outcrosses produce some really nice dogs. I think the genetic diversity of an outcross will produce probably not consistent dogs, but you're going to get some really nice, you'll get some jewels in there. Now, the problem with that is a scatterbred dog is only worth so much moving forward. So you have to kind of start to formulate a plan with it. Usually where you see people wane in breeding is once they get into, once they start dipping into generation 2 and 3 and they start trying to line breed on stuff, they don't have as much success. Because that's kind of when you start to get into the weeds, and you got to be patient, and you got to try some stuff and see see if you get something fruitful from it. I can tell you right now, I put two dogs together. I put Stella Ghost litter together, and both of those two dogs standing on their own are absolute exceptional animals. Both great temperaments, both typey dogs complementing each other perfect. And the litter itself didn't turn out, it didn't say it was a bad litter, but it didn't turn out the way that I thought it would. And that was a 3-2 breeding on sugar, and I was like, okay, that's not where I'm going to go with this anymore. Then I took Ghost and bred her to, I did a second breeding with Melissa Garone in Top Gun, and took Ghost to this, standard hybrid female, and the litter was absolutely knocked down, like exceptional. Kept 3 females off that litter, kept the male in co-own off that litter, and all those dogs are breed worthy. So, it's just, you got to have patience. And if you don't have that, if you're not patient, have the waiting game in you, you're just never going to realize anything besides a couple nice dogs here and there,
Right.
And you can talk your breeding program up all you want, but it takes longevity and some real time in the trenches and being honest with yourself to see if you're going to get something worth value,
Right. So how is the heat and cold tolerance of your yard?
Well, I can tell you this, a handful of dogs are in the house full time. We have 2 pairs that we run, crate and rotate. As a side note, breeding is tough on a marriage, and my marriage ended, and probably breeding was part of that. It ended amicably. We were both in a good mindset when we went our own ways, but dogs definitely played a big part of that separation. And with moving on in life came a new girlfriend. She actually had a dog from me, and then she has a Dalmatian. So those 2 run together in the house. And then I've got another pair, a male and a female, that run in the house. The other dogs have runs, exterior runs that lead into a building. They're out. I mean, I live in central Ohio, so I get everything from the coldest cold to the 90 plus 100% humidity days. And I don't baby them. They get shade, they get water, they get the access to the building. The building has a fan. If you can't hack it out there, you're not going to hack it. And fortunately for me, like I said, I just really haven't had the breathing problems. I've got 1 dog in my yard now that gravels a little bit at the back of the throat, and that's it. Other than that, every other dog I could take out, run the piss out of them, flirt pole them, and whisper quiet, just absolute good dogs. They don't have that loose kind of throat feel, and ends up building scar tissue and stuff and getting worse over years. And a lot of people can tell you that their dogs breathe good, but I don't think you can say that truly until they're about 3 years old and have really kind of matured. Because if they got a little rattle at 12, 13 months old, by the time they're 4, they're full on sucking wind, and they're having a hard time breathing. And that's tough on a dog. I mean, just that lack of oxygen, I don't care if you're a human with asthma or a dog that's not getting the full wind, it's going to shorten your life. I mean, that's fact.
Right. Now, I guess this is a 2-part question. If you're, gun to your head, so to speak, and had to pick another breed, or if you had to outcross to another breed, what breed would that be?
Well, if I had to switch breeds, I think, I think that's changed over the years for me. I still in my heart would love nothing more than to try to get into boxers. I just haven't seen very many, occasionally if I'm watching like the National Dog Show and I'll see one, I'm like, wow, that's a really good looking, the aesthetics of that animal are good. What I really never cared for with the boxers was just that high energy. An American Bulldog, to me, I can get them dialed in by like 9-10 months. They're kind of chilled out, and they're still a puppy, but you've kind of got them dialed in. They'll settle in pretty quickly mentally. Boxers are just not that way. I mean, you can go 2-3 years and they still act like a clown. I guess if somebody had a gun to my head and I had to change breeds, it probably would go to Rots. I have seen some of the same issues in Rots that I have in American Bulldogs with people really bullying them up, which is weird. But, I probably would, again, I think Rots are going the same direction as American Bulldogs with two standards. You got some that are narrow head, long nose, and you got some, I've seen some that I follow on Instagram that are straight up look like an American Bulldog type head. And I can only assume that the breathing is right behind it. So I guess it would be Rots if I was going to try to get into something else. As far as crossbreeding in to an American Bulldog, I know a lot. I guess it would just depend on your purpose. Not sure why anybody would truly do it. I guess if I was going to dabble with it, I probably would go somewhere along the lines of a boxer, or, I hate to say it, I mean, a greyhound, something with wind and muscle. I don't know what you would really gain from the two, but
I always thought that I always think of if I were to clean up any breed. And okay, let's really spike the health. In
if that was the motivation, I'd probably go to pits. A good working pit would probably be where I would go if I was looking to really clean up some stuff and just get back with the wind and the drive and I don't know. It's just there's a lot of good American Bulldogs if you're in the right circles. You know what I mean? If you make friends and don't make enemies and you keep your options open, there's some good dogs out there. But you got to get out there and find them. I don't have enough life left in me to try to experiment moving into crossbreeding. But I'm still trying to hone in my second decade of breeding. I'm going to try to hone in, and I've really tried to work the two type, not two types, but I have basically two projects. My graffiti line, which is based off of India, and those heavily colored, really performance, leaner muscled, taller American Bulldogs, and then I've got Prophet in that reggae line, which is more circulated around that standard hybrid type that is really a specimen of muscle, probably a little heavier build as far as the muscle, probably doesn't have the same level of wind, but aesthetically just eye pleasing as all get out. That's kind of where my head goes. I've done some other, this Annie with the Bronco, inbred Bronco bitch. I've started a bucking line, but her first litter was extremely big and it was really tough on her. I'm not going to breed her again. It's just not fair to the animal. So that may never go anywhere unless I go and find another related male to take back to these pups. But I'd focus on kind of keeping those two lines organized and phenotypes making sense. I'm kind of a fan of color genetics. I really look in a litter if you got two different colored parents. Typically, dogs follow suit with the color. Not to say that there's not an exception to the rule here and there, but I've noticed that if you kind of follow through the markings, if a dog, we call it a wink. If the Prophet's got a little brindle patch, it's a small brindle patch on his eye that comes down from Doc, and I've had another dog off of him, Casper, that carried that. He fits that same phenotype. I had another dog in this litter off him that fits that same phenotype, and I follow through that, and you'll see that watch those dogs develop. So when I go through my selection process, I know what I'm looking for as far as phenotype. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Now, how close are you willing to breed?
I've done a mother to son. I've done half brother, half sister. I've done half brother, half sister with connections on both male side of that litter. So, basically doing a 3-3 and a 2-2 at the same time. So, I mean, I'm willing to breed as close, and I think you got to. I think you got to be ballsy enough to take those risks. Mm-hmm. Now, would I continue down that road? Probably not right away. So, I mean, now I've got the mother, son, daughter. So it's an inbred on the mother. I'm going to take her off yard. And then the plan is I've got another female Let me think through this. I've got another female that is the same inbred mother she would be a granddaughter of her, and I'll take that to a related male. So both of those dogs will go to a half brother. So they'll both get bred that way. And then with the intention of bringing those dogs back together. So you'll be re-inbreeding on the original female and then breeding on the two new males that are related from off yard. So, I mean, I'm very calculated kind of how I navigate through stuff. Every now and again, I'll just kind of throw some stuff together that doesn't have relation to get some of those wild outcrosses. Like, okay, I got this new dog. Maybe we can start to think about how to formulate him through the other females, without too much relation. But yeah, I'll breed tight. I mean, I've done it for the last 4 or 5 years. That's why I'm kind of backed into a corner now and ready to move on. And fortunately, it bought me enough time to really kind of mature into what I wanted and watch who had what. And I've made my decision. That's
right. Now, when it comes to, I guess this is kind of a 2-part question as well. When you're looking at a litter, what makes you decide to keep something, and then what do you do to further test that puppy?
Okay, good question. So for me, we whelp in our house. I have one of the bedrooms is a dedicated whelping room. So first and foremost, I mean, it depends. I usually try to get all my litters to the point where if I'm just doing one a year, we try to get it where the pups are on the ground in that February-March corridor, assuming that timing works out. So that way, when the pups are really kind of up and moving around, by April, we can get them outside. And even if it pushes a little deeper into the summer, to get them outside. So ideally, what I do is I'm a very observant person. I mean, it's just I'm very detail oriented. So I'll take a litter out. I watch them in the house, at 3, 4, 5 weeks when they start to get their legs underneath them. We'll take that litter and we'll take the whole group and drop them out in the yard and see, okay, who's doing what. Some litters you drop in the yard and they are just like hell on wheels. They don't give a shit. Sometimes they're all a little bit tepid, and you got to be patient to see. I don't really grade a dog on that first reaction, more so on the recovery time, if that makes sense. So if I put a group of litter down and then they're all kind of tepid, well, if in 30, 45, a minute later, they're kind of, oh, this is cool, let's move around. Then, okay, well, if there's a handful of those pups that don't move around, I'm going to take note of it, but I'm not going to live or die by it, and then as they get older, I've got some runs behind the house dedicated for litters, and I'll put them outside for the day. It helps to minimize the waste in the house and cleaning up the whelping box. But I'll put them outside for the day and let them get used to life around them. The other dogs barking, me mowing the grass, other dogs passing by, checking them out. When I'm mowing that grass, I'm watching. I got a riding mower because I got a lot of space. And I'm watching, oh, okay, after second or third time, or who's coming to the front of the kennel to examine what I'm doing, who's hiding in the back of the kennel, is anybody hiding in the back of the kennel? And these dogs, the most confident pup inside could be the least confident pup outside, and vice versa. And you could have a whole litter of curtain hangers, you could have a whole litter of just laid back lazy pups. I've seen dogs that are super drivey kind of came out and be like, I go back to that first India breeding. India times Hardy, both dogs are super hot. I'm like, oh God, I have this litter on the ground, and there was a handful of, just ankle biters just giving me hell. I had one dog in that litter named Handsome Jack that drove me freaking crazy. I could boot him across the yard. He was right back on me every time. And I was like, man, I'm never going to get rid of this dog. He's going to be here forever, and I'm going to hate him. You know what I mean? That was my mindset. I was like, I don't want this pup anymore. And people took that litter and they went to doggy daycare, dog parks, all the shit I would have totally told them. I tell them, never do this stuff. And these people were just adamant. They're like, yeah, we've been taking them for 4 years, never had a problem with them. None of the dogs were dog aggressive. Both parents were totally dog aggressive. So, the rhyme or reason for that is unbeknownst to me. But as far as what I pick, I can get caught up. Everybody does, and don't let any breeder tell you any different. You can get caught up with a favorite right away. You know, I've had favorites from the day I've pulled them out of mom, cleaned the sack off, and got them ready. But at the end of the day, when I get to that kind of that inkling of when it's time to make a decision, 6, 7, 8 weeks. Obviously, structurally, as a show guy, I'm trying to take in account as much as I can. But these dogs, they change so much. A dog with great angulation at 8 weeks could have zero angulation at 2 years, and inversely, a dog that has great angulation could keep that angulation. A dog that has great at layback in its chest, come back 2 years, its shoulders are set forward. It's just totally different dog. So, you know, with that being said, I always stop at 6, 7 weeks. I cut all my favorites out of my head, and I look at the breeding. I say, what did I do this breeding for? Mm-hmm. What was the purpose? What was the tool that I was hoping to create from this breeding? And then I gravitate towards that dog. If I was looking for a hybrid dog with Prophet's phenotype, and I wanted in a female version because I saw it in this litter off of him with this bitch, that's what I'm going to pick. And I'm going to stop getting into the favorites of, oh, that dog's really typey, she's cool, oh, she hangs. I mean, I don't give a shit about any of that stuff. I want the most, I don't want to say I want the most obnoxious puppy, but I don't want anything with a weak temperament. And if you have a weak temperament in any way, shape, or form, you're gone from my program. I just won't do it. You make a great pet for somebody, and you will have no issues. They're not to that point where they're nerve biters, and you know, I've never had that issue. But I won't keep that in my program. I want something that's even tempered. I have dogs that literally have grown up on this property as pups, depending on when they're born, roll through the winter, and I grab them and I take them into a dog show, you know, at 13 months old, and they got to perform. I'm not gonna have somebody they have to be absolutely exceptional. I mean, not all dogs love a dog show ring, but that's just one example. I guess take it to the Home Depot, or take it to the bar on the patio, or take it to wherever. That dog's got to be able to maintain itself, and if it can, it's gone. I just won't deal with it. Yeah. But that's and I've no breeder can ever tell you you're going to pick the right dog. I mean, I've picked the wrong dog numerous times. I've let great dogs go. You know, in some instances, I've been able to get my hands back on them for breeding, but in the same respect, you're just gonna you got to get enough litters going where you just if you have a loss, you accept your loss and you move on. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I used to be really hung up about having something from every litter. You know what I mean? Having something turn out that I kept from every litter, and it got to be the point where it was just like, it's not going to happen. And I have more males than I could ever use in my life right now out in the world. So now I'm to the point where I can hone myself into the top 5%. You know, oh, that's really what I want. I don't need to accept that because I got that. And I'll just, if you're breeding right, I don't think you need to bounce around from, like I said, I try to use a male 2 to 3 times on 2 or 3 different situations to see what they produce. Mm-hmm. And then I put them on the shelf. They may retire or they may come back and skip me a generation, but I don't, I try to use stuff calculatedly and not just willy-nilly and bounce all over the place. Right. It's easy to do. I mean, it's really easy to get caught up with that.
How many dogs do you got on your yard now?
On property, I've got 12. I've got 3 retired females. I've got a neutered Dalmatian that's free to anybody that wants him. And I've got 3 studs at the house. Not a big fan of having 3 at the house. 2 is about as many as I really care for. But I've got a younger male that I'm letting develop. And if I found a co-owned home for him, I'd let him go as long as I could trust that I'd have access to him. And then it's just all females, man. I really keep the females. I try to let them develop, let them really mature. Don't need to have a reason to breed them early. I like a dog that I can pull into the house from the kennel that is mature enough to be able to accept the role of motherhood and get acclimated quickly and have the sense to do so and not have to worry about immature issues, which can happen.
What are you feeding your dogs?
Well, I was a big raw guy for years. I was a raw guy when I was married and my dog count was lower. Once I kind of pushed the threshold past 6 dogs, the storage of raw becomes a real problem. I still host a co-op where I get a semi delivered to my office once a month for other people in Columbus on a Facebook group that people can buy raw. So I still have access to it, and I still intermingle it, and I'll clean someone's freezer. I've got another co-owned dog owner of mine that she's been really gracious to bring me finds that she's had numerous bags of old freezer burn chicken and stuff. So I still do throw pretty much anything at the dogs. I was a Victor guy. I'm definitely a casualty to the recall. I moved over to Diamond Pro 89. I got through about 2 bags. The dogs seemed to be doing good on that. The poop stayed the same. Then the 3rd bag we got, they wouldn't touch. I don't know if there was something going on with the bag, the smell or something, and they just would not eat it. And if a Bulldog doesn't eat, you got a problem. So we scrapped the bag. I moved them back down to the Diamond beef and rice, because I don't really care to feed the chicken-based foods. But it's been a nightmare. That food is just, I got monster piles of shit that's really non-digested nonsense, and it's just making my runs a constant nightmare to keep clean. So I've recently, and it just arrived today. I got the notification, but I switched over to Next Level, which was the originators of Victor. I bit the bullet and got on their monthly and bought 500 pounds to the house. I'm going to run that through the dogs and see if we can get it back dialed in. But praying that Victor comes back out or this one works, because it's been a nightmare. I mean, I loved feeding the raw, and I was, it's very time consuming. There are premixes that you can buy now from Ross Wells and other stuff. And I'm very well versed on a proper raw diet. If anybody, has reached out to me in the past, that's 9 times out of 10. That's what we've talked about, was how to condition their dogs and get them to the same place. And I will say my dogs were probably physically better by at least 10 to 15%. On the raw, the water consumption goes way down, almost non-existent water consumption. And I'd do on my own premix. I'd get 50 pounds of this, that, and the other, and I'd premix everything with the bone and the liver, spleen, you name it. I had it. I had all different types of protein, from fish to salmon to chicken to beef. And I was Ziplocking them. I've heard you talk about it. I'd Ziploc them up, 2-pound bags, and I would put those bags. I'd put 6 bags in a grocery bag, and I'd put them back in my freezer. And I fed frozen. I just fed chunks. I'd rip the bags off, and I'd throw it out in their runs and let them satiate themselves on the raw. And I found that when I did feed frozen, I fed raw, after they'd finished their food for 2 to 3 hours, I wouldn't hear a peep out of any dog. They were just totally satiated. And I don't know if it's a mental thing in conjunction with a physical thing, but they were pretty happy on that. And then once I got divorced, there was a little bit of a shell shock with the financial situation, which is to be expected. And then one of my freezers was kind of on its last leg, and I was like, man, buying, my dog count went up, keeping dogs over litters, and I have to buy 800 pounds a month, and it only comes monthly. So storing 800 pounds was starting to get a little cumbersome. Dog food I can go and get every week if I want, or I can do a monthly thing, and it's just a lot easier to store. I still do supplement quite a bit with this and that. Like I said, with the raw, I use a lot of, I buy that, like a gallon jug of that Alaskan salmon oil. You can get it on Amazon, organic, I think, and I'll pump that shit into their kibble. And I use Nupro Gold, which is it's a joint kind of supplement. I think it also helps with fleas, which I've never really had too much issue with. But I give them that stuff, and then basically any leftovers or anything, man, if something's been in the fridge for a little too long, we didn't get to it, it's going to the dogs. I'm not wasting it. They'll eat anything. I've seen dogs eat green chicken, dead raccoons. They don't care, man. They'll eat anything.
Yeah. So, before we wrap up, what advice would you give somebody who wants to get into the American Bulldog?
Well, I think if I was going to rely on my own experience, where I feel like I did myself a service, was learning how to train the dogs first. the biggest aspect, and I probably the whether I claim I produce the best dogs or not, and how that compares to the general community where it stands right now, is a moot point to the 30 years of reference that I have, with almost 30 years now, with health issues, training, behavioral issues, stages along the line, puppy issues and stuff. All of my owners can lean on me as a reference to qualm their trips to the vet. When is it serious? When is it not? Oh, my dog's got hives. What does that mean? Oh, this has popped up. What does that mean? And I have, not that I'm a vet, but I have a very strict protocol that I keep with my dogs, and I encourage it with my puppy owners. Some people listen, some people don't, some people veer, some people do their own thing, and that's their choice, because ultimately it's their dog. But, taking the time to learn the breed, learn how to train the breed. They are a very hard breed to keep in multiples. I've seen a handful of breeders that let dogs out in large groups. I don't subscribe to that. I have broken up way too many dog fights in my life, and I can do it and sit right back on the couch, and it doesn't hype me up anymore. But I've learned over the years how to mitigate those issues. I've learned how to try to communicate that with other people so they don't go down that same path, but spend some time with the breed and learn to connect and train with them first. And then take on the aspect of breeding. People come and go in every dog breed. People come and go. This just happens to be a dog breed that kind of is built around machismo, if you will. And I think a lot of people's egos get in, and, everybody's got a different way of going through life, but a lot of people get into dogs thinking that they're going to immediately jump the line and do it better than guys that have been doing it for 10, 20, even 30 years now, that are still breeding. And, it's not that easy. If it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. And there's a lot more that goes into dog breeding than just dogs, dog care. It's a money pit. It's a labor of love, and there's no money in dogs. It's the love of the breed. I've said it, and people have heard me say it throughout probably the last 10 years. I'd be driving a damn Porsche if I didn't own these dogs. And, if you come into it, be humble, learn, don't think that you're going to be better than anybody else, because there's a lot of people out there that have been trying to do it and do it better than you for a long time. And they know they can give you some tricks to bypass, give you a little speed pass through the game, but you're not just going to jump ship, jumping on the newest, greatest stud and think that you're going to get something. A lot of people don't understand pedigrees and scatterbred versus line bred and inbred and the genetic value of that. I heard Vito talk, and he made a good analogy when he says, when you inbreed, you're basically eliminating genes, and that's a great way to think about it. The one thing I liked about him it was encouraging to me, was that he said, when you get back to using some of those dogs that were crunched down and inbred and taking it to outcrosses, it starts to express the genes. And that's encouraging for me, because that's my next phase of where I'm going, trying to take some of these highly inbred dogs and put them back to other dogs that are tightly bred, and try to, minimize my gains, if you will, trying to make a step forward, but without blowing it all so wide open that it's a brand new net with all brand new stuff. I'm just trying to move forward and incrementally, so I can kind of keep the net, obtainable, to where I can be predictable with my results. Mm-hmm. And some people, everybody's got a different mentality towards dogs. I set out when I did get into breeding and I started to do this, my goal was to set out to create a bloodline. Not everybody's out there doing that, in my head, in order to create a bloodline, you're creating a dog that if you saw it and somebody else saw it and somebody else saw it, they all know, like, did you get that from Justin? Is that from Justin? That's how you know you got a bloodline. You know what I mean? You can put a shit ton of dogs together and it can have your name on it, but if they're not consistently typed out, then it really means nothing. So, mm-hmm. Guys just need to be patient, and I think I touch on an important part, and it's not something that it's not a great thing, but this is hard on a marriage. It's hard on a family. You start getting into a lot of dogs, and you don't have a partner that's as enthusiastic as you in that passion. It's going to start to wedge between your relationship. So good communication with your partner's important, because if you start taking yourself off into a tangent, A, it's a financial pit, and B, it starts to limit your lifestyle. We don't take vacations. You know what I mean? We don't do vacations. We don't do anything, man. We do dogs, and we do horses. That's a different deal. But we do dogs, we do horses, and we do work, and that's my life. And that's sacrifice you make to have these animals. And that's what I've kind of built myself into. And there's days where I wake up and, man, I want to be out of the dog so bad. But then I see something and something inspires me. I have a litter and I get something really nice out of it. And I'm like, man, I'm back in. I'm back in.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. I started doing a deep dive into these magazines, and then I started trying to update my website. And I've got a little Breed Media page where I try to keep up on any new information that's out there for American Bulldogs on YouTube. And I came across your show, and man, I was really happy to see some American Bulldog stuff. I listened to all those guys. Some I know, maybe not personally, but know of more than the others. Some I've actually friended on Facebook since. So it's good to have a new look and new people to talk to when things go forward. So no, I appreciate you just as much as, I appreciate you giving some content for me, and hopefully somebody gets something out of this that's worth value.
Absolutely. And what's your website?
Centerbullkennel.com is my dog's. And it's a pretty informative website. And I've spent some time on it. It's got a whole health section. It's got stuff on structure. It's got a little bit of breed media. I've put some of your videos up there for people to kind of take a deep dive into. There's some other stuff that's been out there in the past. There's really not a whole lot of stuff on the breed that's really good, if you will. And you kind of got to get deep into the weeds and get to the sources to get something that's actually got some value. Most of the stuff is just, commercial nonsense that really doesn't have any value to the breed. But, yeah, I mean, you're more than welcome. People can visit it, but I keep up with my future breedings. I pretty much keep it updated with all my productions. Obviously Instagram, if you're on there, Centerbulls, that pretty much has a large, I think we're approaching 3,000 posts of large body of my work, and very transparent with my program. I like to have the dogs out there, good, bad, or otherwise. And, fortunately, favor has been on the good side for me. But I try to keep it out there so people know what they're getting into. And I'm always a reference for conversation and problems with dogs. I mean, I've always tried to help people as best I could.